Now, in recent years in the NFL draft, there's been, frankly, a gaping void of talent at the tight end position in terms of where players are taken compared to the needs of NFL teams. So, this just kind of falls in line with the fact that college football and the talent they were putting out in the utilization of players at the tight end position wasn't matching the ever evolving NFL reality. Well, this year you don't have to worry about it so much because this is a really, really good tight end class. And as I've referenced before, I felt there were two tight ends that were a cut above the rest, and one of them is O.J. Howard from the University of Alabama. Now, when I watch O.J. Howard, 6'6", about 245 pounds or so, the senior part of a national championship team, a guy with a lot of big game experience, what really stands out is that there's not a glaring weakness in his game. Sure, there are areas that can be worked on, that can be improved upon, where he can get better. But what I really like about OJ Howard when I watch him on film is I see a guy that is very, very NFL ready and should be able to make some type of contribution year one. Now, how much of that contribution will be as a blocker, as a secondary tight end? How much of that will be as a primary pass catcher? That will remain to be determined. But when I look at OJ Howard, he screams out to me first round talent. He screams out to me top 20 pick. And a team is going to do very well for themselves by taking this guy and just plugging him in and playing him right away. Don't overthink it. Don't get cute because he can play and he can make a difference, in my opinion, right away. You look at him, he's got really good size, 6'6", 245 pounds. He could use maybe about 10 pounds more of muscle, but he doesn't need to get a ton bigger because what you don't want to do is have him get too big, and then that really helps to minimize his quickness and his speed. He's got a lot of initial quickness and burst off of the line of scrimmage. Maybe not incredibly explosive, but he has more than enough, and it strikes you while from an athleticism standpoint, he doesn't have big time explosiveness. He plays very quick, and he has enough initial quickness to be able to be a problem coming off of the line of scrimmage. And you look at his speed as well. Once he gets the ball in his hands, you're surprised at how much he's able to do with the ball in his hands, which ties into his great run after the catch ability. He's got some wiggle. He's got some zuzu to make some people miss. He's got that quickness, but more importantly, he's got that speed to be a big time threat, almost a borderline home run threat at the position. You see this at different times. I think of the national championship game in 2016 against Clemson, where he sat there and caught the pass out wide and he was just flying down the sidelines. You wouldn't expect it from a guy like that to be able to have those type of quicks and that type of speed, but he does. Also, really, really reliable pass catcher. Soft, natural hands. Does a great job of consistently catching with his hands, not letting the ball get into his body. And while there weren't a ton of spectacular, special type of catches, he pretty much catches just about everything that is thrown his way from a reliability and a consistency standpoint. So maybe when you look at things like catch radius, uh, does he have the ability to go up and win the jump ball at the highest point? I didn't see that a lot at Alabama, but again, that could be more so based off of his utilization within the system than it is an actual reflection of the athletic skills that he does or does not have. In terms of his blocking ability, probably the best all-around blocker at the position in this draft class. Again, for me, it's not the most important trait for a tight end to have, but surely it's nice to have it. And when you have a guy that can be that dual threat as a tight end, that can be effective as a receiver and as a blocker, it just opens up the possibilities for what you could do offensively. You don't bring in O.J. Howard into the game and automatically assume that it's going to be a run or it's going to be a pass. You just don't know. Because you can line him up all over the place and you can do all types of different things with him. And that's really, really appealing. Now, with his blocking ability, there are times where I view him as more of a technique than strength and brute kind of ass whoop type of guy, in the sense of he's not going to kick your ass off of the line of scrimmage. He'll get in good position. He utilizes good technique. He's very good at sealing off defenders, but he can sometimes get overpowered, and he needs to get more physical and explode into his blocks and be a little more decisive with his hand punch, with his initial punch. And if he is, he could be one of the best all-around tight ends and one of the best blocking tight ends in the National Football League. In terms of weaknesses, I will say that route running is something he's going to have to work on a little bit. He doesn't have the most extensive route tree. He's good with the routes he does run. He just could run a lot more, especially when you look at the athletic package that he has. He seems like he's somebody that's suited to run a pretty full route tree, and he just didn't do that much at Alabama. And I think part of that, again, was about system and utilization, and I will get to more of that in a moment. There would be a little bit of concern for me in terms of separation. Um, he may struggle with more athletic linebackers or more physical linebackers. We'll see how he's able to do against press coverage. Sometimes he got very, very open in large part due to the play design of the system that they ran with Lane Kiffin at Alabama more than his actual skills or his actual route running. But I don't want to sit there and harp on it too much like he was really, really bad because he wasn't. I mean, he was plenty good enough for a college tight end to be able to get open when he needed to. And I envision that he'll still be able to get open at the NFL level. And if you coach him up and improve his technique at all, he's going to be really, really good and really, really dangerous. So it's like I said, there's a lot of things you just look at him and you say, he's really, really good at it. If he works at it and improves at it at all, he's going to be special. And that's what really stands out to me. Not a guy you have a ton of injury concern with. I think he had one MCL bruise back in like 2012. I mean, that's like 4 years ago. You have to think in terms of football players for a guy that's been able to answer the bell relatively consistently. That's pretty good. So you feel like if you're thinking about investing a first round pick on him, this is one of those kind of low risk, potentially decent height to very high reward kind of candidates. In terms of OJ Howard, one thing from an intangible standpoint that kind of concerns me is the fact that you look at the physical package on film and you see the athleticism, you see the size, you see just how well rounded his game is, and you wonder just why he wasn't utilized more at Alabama. And you wonder how come he wasn't more productive. And you sit there and see, this guy that should be able to absolutely dominate, and he just doesn't. Now, sometimes that may come down to the will of the player, the attitude of the player, the work ethic of the player. But I don't know if that necessarily is the case, because even if I could sit there and say that he's naturally gifted, and he is a naturally gifted tight end, you could see improvement and progression in his skills over the past few years at Alabama. So it does suggest that he's been coached up, he's worked hard, he's improved, he's gotten better. I think it's more so just a reflection of the way he was utilized in the system at Alabama. Granted, he played in a very talented team, and granted, he wasn't in a situation where he was going to get 100 catches for 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns. But I think he had like 40-something receptions, 600-something yards, a couple of touchdowns. He should have been much more prevalently used as a red zone target, and frankly, he should have been more instrumental in what they did in Alabama in the passing game. He should have been targeted more. He should have been featured and utilized more. I know you had Ridley and Darius Stewart on the outside. You have Scarborough in the backfield. But O.J. Howard was too talented to utilize him so infrequently and inconsistently. Like he would have a couple of really big monster games, and then you have several games where he felt like you didn't hear much of anything from him at all. And for his physical talents, that just shouldn't happen. It just shouldn't happen. So when I look at Howard, and again, projecting to what he could do at the NFL level, if anything, I see a guy that's going to be a much better pro than he was a college player because there's going to be more of an emphasis to try and get him into the most ideal and optimal situations. This is a really good talent. Now, for my money, he's the number 2 tight end in this draft class. There are reasons for that. In my next video, I will cover who I think is the number 1 tight end in this draft class, but the margin is not huge. I believe me. And if O.J. Howard ends up being the first tight end taken in this draft, I certainly understand. I certainly get it. And I most certainly will not knock it because there's a lot there to suggest to me that an O.J. Howard is really not just a top 20 talent in this draft, but a top 10 to 15 type of talent in this draft. For teams for years that have been looking for impact out of the tight end position coming out of the draft and being disappointed, this is one of those guys that can give you immediate impact. In terms of his NFL comparison, thinking about a tight end that's very well-rounded, I view him as a more athletic version of a Jason Witten. And that's a pretty high compliment because everybody now assumes, due to consistency and length of production, that Jason Witten's someday going to end up in Canton in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And if you feel like O.J. Howard could be a Jason Witten type of player, which I do, a slightly more athletic Jason Witten, then you're potentially looking at drafting at least a Pro Bowl tight end, if not an all-pro caliber tight end, if not someday down the road a Hall of Fame talent. And that's saying something. And the thing is that I like about OJ Howard, even as I project later on in his career, even if he lost a little bit of a step, even if he lost some of his athleticism, his quickness, his speed, similar to a Jason Witten, I still feel like there would be ways for him to contribute because of just how well-rounded he is as a prospect. And you think about Jason Witten, you go back to that 2000, was it 2003 draft that I think him and Dallas Clark were in. Dallas Clark came from Iowa. Jason Witten came from Tennessee. Jason Witten was a third-round pick. So that's a hell of a comparison. Jason Witten now 14 years in the league. He's going to Canton someday. Maybe OJ Howard could do the same thing. Maybe. It's all bold prediction, way, 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 way off. A lot of it comes down to utilization, being able to stay healthy, progressing and improving his game. But again, I really like OJ Howard and where he fits at the NFL and what he can bring to the table at the NFL level. I really, really do. And I think that if he gets out of the top 20 in this draft, then teams aren't doing their jobs right. Because you cannot tell me there are possibly 20 players in this draft better than OJ Howard. Frankly, there's only like maybe two pass catching options in terms of wide receivers and tight ends combined that I view as being better in this draft class than OJ Howard. The dude's got a lot of stud factor on him. You hope that he's not one of these guys that you look at him and he's always viewed as kind of like a tease where you could see him being so much more, but for some reason it just never happens. Hopefully this is a guy that comes in, he's able to contribute right away, and he's made a bigger part of an offense where he can really shine and show off what he can do, because I think he could do a lot at the tight end position, and whoever takes him in the first round I think will be very, very happy with the results.